back to Brian's Beat.
Nothing is as groovy as the boom 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 of the band with the bedrock beat. Devil and Batman and all of the gang, short and tall we have wherever we meet. Everything is going for the bedrock bunch. All the gang is hip at the new drag strip. You'll see Fred and Barney too.
Yabba dabba doo.
On the Pebbles and Bear Band Show.
Hour 2 of Brian's Beat. It's going to be one of those mixed days. I've heard some showers are in the forecast, not only for today, but maybe even tomorrow as we get ready for the New Bedford Half Marathon. At any rate, I know a lot of the restaurants and bars are gearing up because tomorrow is St. Patrick's Day. Right now, Mattapoisett, 41 degrees. It's 39 in Westport, 41 in New Bedford, and always the WBSM app in your car and in your home. We spent hour 1 talking a little bit about the New Bedford police officers and trying to gauge your thought on how you feel about them having police body cameras. I think it's a good move, and I openly admit I did not feel that way several years ago, but I've come around. I think it's a good idea. And we also talked about the fact that 25% of people between the ages of 20 and 30 say they plan on leaving the greater Boston area within the next 5 years. This is according to a survey done by the Greater Boston Chamber of Commerce Foundation. I don't know if there is a similar survey for this area by one SouthCoast chamber. But one thing's for sure, I went to the job fair the other day over at White's in Westport, thrown by one SouthCoast chamber. In fact, Gazelle from Fun 107, he was also there. And I talked to numerous business owners, and I did 2 separate tours. One in the early morning, I took a break for about 40 minutes, and I came back for an afternoon session. And the afternoon session was a little different than the morning session. I'm going to get into that in just a bit. But right now, it is time for the Brian's Beat quote of the day, courtesy of Monthly Fee RX. If you're spending less than $20 a month for prescription drugs, great. If not, monthlyfeerx.com might be a good option for you. And the Brian's Beat quote of the day, courtesy of Reba McEntire. For me, singing sad songs often has a way of healing a situation. It gets the hurt out in the open, into the light, and out of the darkness. And Reba dedicated her 16th album to her road band that died in a plane crash on this date in 1991. So now we know why some of those songs are really, really sad songs. Okay, so the chamber event, the early morning session, and I spoke to Gazelle about this and a few other people. I looked around and I said, not as many people this year as in previous years. And he chimed pretty much the same thing to me. He goes, over the past few years, fewer and fewer people are showing up. Now, I'm thinking fewer and fewer vendors, fewer and fewer participants, folks with resumes looking for jobs. And it is both. It was both. But as I analyzed more, what I was finding is that there were plenty of vendors there, anywhere from 75 to more than 100, plenty of vendors there, but not as many people looking for the opportunities that the vendors had. And so I think sometimes when we think about job fairs, it's great to throw everybody into a bunch. But maybe, it might be difficult to pull something like this off, but maybe you need to cater to a certain segment. And I'm not trying to tell one South Coast Chamber how to run their event. And certainly the afternoon things looked more lively than the early morning. But maybe there's a white-collar event. Maybe there's a blue-collar event. I spoke to Julie Gallagher. You probably don't know who she is. Julie is the owner of the Chick-fil-A located in Fall River. A 4-year process for her to get a Chick-fil-A, something that she really, really wanted. She was looking for managers of Chick-fil-A. Now, I just spoke to her, I said, frankly, when I think of Chick-fil-A, I think fast food like McDonald's. I'm not thinking if you're at a job fair that you might be looking for managers. Somebody would have to come up and hear your presentation in order to know that you're really looking for managers. Otherwise, they might just walk on by. And so that's what I'm getting at. You're looking for managers. Maybe this should be a manager's type of job fair, an engineer's type of job fair, medical workers, medical technicians type of job fair, teachers job fair, something along those lines. Now, I don't mean to make it too specific, but if people have an idea of what's going to be at the job fair, then they can make a decision before they leave the house. Do they want to go to that job fair? Welcome back. Are you familiar? I guess if you live in Fall River, you're familiar with Congressman Jake Auchincloss. He represents a sliver of Fall River. Well, turns out that this campaign cycle, again, he's up for re-election in November. He plans to tout a lot, many, however way you want to term it, gun control measures. And why is he doing this? He's pretty sure he's going to get reelected. Okay, that's number one. But the other reasons is he's going to be helping the Democratic Party win the White House, retake the House of Representatives, and bolster up their lead in the U.S. Senate. That's his plan. He is a combat veteran, Marine. And according to a press release from a group, Beyond Thoughts and Prayers, Auchincloss knows that weapons of war don't belong on our streets or near our schools. Now, you and I both know that most of the time, there are 365 this year, 366 days in a year. Most of the time, these so-called weapons of war aren't out there on the streets, and certainly not in our schools. That's not to say that they haven't been used in school shootings or in other shootings. But day in and day out, nada. And yet, Congressman Auchincloss is going to be out there pushing gun control measures, basically pushing them to the point where you can't have a gun. He's going to be out there going for red flag laws, background checks on all gun purchases, which you may believe is not a bad idea. Safe storage laws. Once again, what happens if somebody learns how to pick that lock? Who gets blamed? So, these rules and regulations, red tape, they all sound like great ideas, but do they really work? Well, Congressman Auchincloss, he knows they don't work, but it's something that he can go out there on the campaign trail to talk about. And that's going to be one of the ways that he will help other Democrats get elected to the White House and House of Representatives. I mean, I don't know how well that's going to work for Joe Biden to get reelected. It might, but my guess is probably not much. More aid from the United States is now going into Gaza. Stuff was airdropped not too long ago, but I don't know if you saw any of the pictures that woman friend and I were seeing on YouTube. But some of these airdrops, the bags of food, corn, for instance, it would just bust open and when it landed on the ground, and you see these really skinny, bone skinny kids out there trying to pick up the food as quickly as possible, knowing that there'd be others following suit to try to do the same thing. And this food is not only on the ground, but it's in the ground of a lot of sand. And can you imagine corn, which is not necessarily the best food to be eating anyway, but corn mixed with sand, trying to pick it up and put it in a little cup to take it home for the family to eat? That's the kind of crap that's going on in Gaza right now. Senator Chuck Schumer yesterday came out and blatantly stated that the Israeli government needs to be changed, in particular Netanyahu. Which is interesting when you think about Schumer. I mean, he's been a staunch supporter basically up until this past week for what Israel was doing. Now, all of a sudden, all right, Netanyahu's got to leave. Well, I think he's going to end up leaving anyway. And I also believe this. I still believe that Hamas is not losing. I don't want to come out and say they're winning the campaign right now, because certainly you can see by the bombings and all the refugees that it doesn't look like a victory right now. But it's a standoff. Because as Israel tries to bring ground troops into Gaza, their tanks get blown up to the point that they need to be repaired and they can't use them. And their soldiers are picked off and dying. Now, are they dying at the same rate as the Gazans? No. But the folks that Israel says, air quotes, says they're going after, they're not getting them. They're not getting Hamas, and they're not going to get Hamas because Hamas is underground. And they do come up, they take pot shots, and then they go back down into the ground, saving their strength. Israel has reluctantly agreed that they're not getting all the tunnels that they thought that they were getting at the beginning. Yeah, they're fighting a battle that they really are not going to win. And now they're finding the tenor here in the United States isn't exactly how Bibi has been building it up to be. That Americans want us doing what they're doing. No, Americans do not want you aimlessly bombing buildings and killing Palestinians in order to say this is how we're going to get back at Hamas. And I heard mentioned the other day, I'm not quite sure who was stating it, but I heard mentioned that Russia had leaders from Hamas visiting in Moscow. And basically, what I can envision happening here is that the name Hamas might change, but the Hamas leaders are still going to be in power. How would that make you feel? 508-996-0500, which brings it back home again. There is a congressperson from Massachusetts who believes that the federal government should use $3 billion of our tax dollars for shelter and services for migrants. $3 billion for shelters and services. Now, I guess this is going to be used by local communities, not only here in the Commonwealth, but throughout the country. The congressperson is Lori Trahan. Here's a quote from a letter that she sent in earlier this week to the Homeland Security Subcommittee. There is a resounding need from cities and towns across the country for increased federal support to provide migrants with short-term humanitarian services. The money is needed to provide urgent resources to cities, states, and towns encountering high volumes of migrant arrivals. You know, if we don't provide the services, maybe we don't get such a high number of migrant arrivals. That's what I'm saying. But you've got Congressman Trahan, you know. I don't know who she is, really. I think she won that district up by where Paul Tsongas used to have up in the northern tier up by the New Hampshire border. But, you know, here we go again. $3 billion. Where's the money going to come from? And you know what happens? It's the same thing with educational dollars. What's going to happen is that the nation is already in the red. We already don't have enough money to pay even the interest on the debt. So what's going to happen is the United States, you know, let's say $3 billion. Here's another $3 billion. How it becomes your money that you owe is that the federal government will take a loan out with the Federal Reserve, and there will be interest charged on that money. Now, the United States government, they get a good rate, but they still have to pay that interest back. And then the cities and towns get that money. And the federal government gets that good rate from the Federal Reserve because they know that the federal government is going to tax the people for the money. So you can, in essence, state they created this problem and they're using the me's and you's to pay for the problem that they have created. And if the money doesn't come from the federal government, then it comes from the state, which Maura Healey, our governor, has helped to create. It's a vicious cycle. And of course, then you end up getting taxed some more. There is a Bacon Hill lawmaker who wants to slap a gasoline tax, an additional 3 cents gasoline tax. Now, in the infinite wisdom of this Western Massachusetts politician, it will be a local issue tax. So in other words, the local community would say, yes, they want this tax, or I should say the local politicians. Yes, they want the tax. And then that 3 cents on top of the state tax that's already out there, on top of the federal tax that is already out there, that 3 cents will go to the local communities so the local communities can basically, as they say, fix roads and do other things. What that money will eventually get used for is to pay the pensions of local workers, because after a while, that money is going to get drained. That money might go to schools, because even that money is getting drained at this particular time. I feel sorry for the folks in Dartmouth, because the school board there has used a lot of the ESSER money that came in for salaries. Well, what happens next year when there's no more ESSER money? How are those salaries then paid for? Thankfully, we found out from Colin Hogan of New Bedford Light that New Bedford is using the majority of their ESSER money for building repairs and very little on salaries. And I don't like the fact that there's ESSER money in the first place, but given the fact that that money has come out, I applaud the school committee and school department for at least having the foresight to realize there may not be any more money coming in, so we better take care of things that we need to take care of. And quite frankly, you look at some of the schools in the city of New Bedford, you know they're crumbling. So they're fixing roofs. They fixed the swimming pool over at the high school. But they're also thinking about using about $4 million of the ESSER dollars to build this school health center, of which all the students in the New Bedford school system will be able to use. Yeah, I'm with you. I don't think it should happen, but that's what folks are thinking. What are you thinking? 508-996-0500. Hello.
Hey, good morning.
Hey, good morning.
Hey, here's a thought for you. Just imagine if we never got money from the lottery, if the dispensaries, now the betting. Where would we be without that?
Well, the lottery's been going on for a long time, but the dispensaries, I think you got something there, because remember the fight to make sure that marijuana wasn't legalized here in the state?
Yeah.
Well, you're right. Now, what about gambling money?
Yeah. That's what I just said, gambling.
People were against that too.
Yeah, I told my wife the other day, I said, you know what's crazy? We live in a society now that back in the day when there was the mob and everything they did was illegal, and the only thing we got left to legalize is prostitution. It's just crazy how the world flipped upside down.
Hey, think about that for a second. Can you imagine a prostitute paying taxes?
Listen, they do it in Las Vegas, right? That's the only thing they got left.
But it's different there. They have it in brothels.
Right. They would do the same thing here.
Well, I hope so, but, there's always going to be the renegade.
Yeah, just like there is with the marijuana.
There you go.
The booze. Have a great day.
You too. I appreciate the call. He's absolutely right. I want to bring this full circle because as we talk about these different things and add up the price tag for all of the things that I'm discussing, it brings me back to something I brought up toward the tail end of hour number one, that 25% of people between the ages of 20 and 30 say they plan on leaving the greater Boston area in the next 5 years. Now, from what I saw with the survey, it did not mention where these people would be going. I mean, it's going to be either to a different part of the state outside of greater Boston, which could include this area, which could include Cape Cod, which could include Western Massachusetts, where housing prices, rental prices, and I won't speak for the jobs market, but housing and rental prices are definitely much lower than they are inside 128, inside 495. But then you have I forgot the Western Mass lawmaker's name, who is proposing an additional 3-cent gasoline tax. And what I think is missing is, yes, rent is sky high. Trying to buy a house is nearly impossible for a first-time home buyer. But the cost of living here is astronomical. Have you noticed grocery prices coming down since we basically climbed out of the crisis called pandemic? No. Have you noticed medical prices coming down since we climbed out of the crisis called pandemic? No. We've already talked about housing and rental prices. Inflation is still with us. It isn't as high as it was, but it's still there. And if you look at the price of diesel fuel, which, goes into trucks, the trucks that carry your grocery food, that carry your clothing, that carries just about everything that we buy at some type of store. Diesel fuel is still $4.65 and higher per gallon. It's enough to keep me from driving a diesel at this particular time. You got folks out there complaining about electric vehicles. There's going to be a complaint about just about everything that's going on. But there aren't too many electric vehicles carrying the goods that you and I buy on a regular basis. And so people are kicking back and they're saying, how can I afford to keep on living here in the Commonwealth? And I'm thinking this could be a boon for our area, our backyard, or it could be a big bust. And why would it be a big bust? If the people, the 20 to 30-year-olds in this backyard right here, if they decide that they're going to be like the 20, 30-year-olds up in Greater Boston and leave. I've got a son who left this area to move to Providence. Why? Because rent is cheaper for him in Providence than it would be here or up in the Greater Boston area where he was prior. So I get it. I see it happening within my own family. Now, he is 31, but he's in that same general range of between 20 and 30. How many people, maybe your kids, are thinking the same? I can't afford to make my life happen the way I want it to happen right around here. And so they're thinking about moving. And it's hard to say no. 508-996-0500. That's how you get on Brian's Beat today. Hello.
Good morning, Brian.
Good morning, Brian.
You know the country's hit the crap's hit the fan when you got real estate agents telling you to live in a shed, a utility shed, in what they call now an ADU. You know, you just hook it up to a pickup truck and you can drive it around wherever you want.
I've got no problem with that.
Yeah, I think the country's I think it's hit the fan. I mean, these guys talk about the politicians spending billions like it's pocket change. And between the war in Ukraine and this war in Gaza and the free ride at taxpayer expense for all of these foreign nationals coming in, last year was reported that the United States took in federal tax revenue $4.5 trillion. We have a national debt of $32 trillion, and that's an interest of $300 billion interest that we can't pay. We have an economy that's growing at 2%. It's running on fumes. You know, they keep telling us to pay more taxes. Joe Biden wants to increase capital gains tax and those who have 401k to 40%. And the United States is the largest borrower of the International Monetary Fund. So the Democrats and some Republicans are collapsing this country into oblivion. We have the biggest national debt in the history of civilization, even going back to the Romans.
It makes you wonder how we can keep going like this.
We can't.
You know what? I agree with you, yet for whatever reason, we seem to be chugging along.
Do you know why? Because the United States, the dollar is still the world reserve currency, trade currency within nations. That's why the Federal Reserve is able to manipulate the currency. They talk about China, but the Federal Reserve and Jerome Powell and others, predecessors, have done the same thing. That's why they're getting away with it, because if it wasn't, this country would be in the tank. But if you listen to Auchincloss Sauce, he wants you to work the live long day, pay all your taxes, and then you live in an ADU. That's even if you can afford to turn the lights on.
What in the utility hut?
Yeah, with electricity prices going up, you know, and all of that stuff. I mean, it's pretty sad from where we were and from where we are. And I went shopping at Market Basket the other day, and this guy had a cap on, a black cap on with the white letters. This is not the America that I grew up in. And boy, does that resonate today.
Well, it isn't the America that he grew up in. It's not the America that I grew up in. But how do you evolve by staying the same?
Well, we've allowed these idiots to keep going up on the debt ceiling, you know, and they keep going up and up and up. We're gonna, you know, they're talking about the government's gonna shut down and all this baloney, but yet they keep raising the debt ceiling. They've been doing that since '68. Every time they keep up raising the debt ceiling, and we get deeper and deeper into the hole that we're not going to be able to get out of.
Yeah, I hate to be doom and gloom, except when I'm on the radio. But I don't see how we work ourselves out of this mess. We have, you know, it's amazing. We're talking, $61 million to go to Ukraine. And where's that money coming from? Again, it's money that has to be borrowed because we're already broke. So we have to borrow money, and it's pledged with our tax dollars to be paid off down the road for a losing cause.
Right, and it's the future generations they're going to take it on the chin, and they're going to be much poorer and worse off than we are now. And I remember something, Joe Biden, when he was vice president, went in front of a crowd, and he said, "Don't laugh. We have to spend our way out of this debt." Can you imagine that? And that's what they've been doing, those fools. And this country's going to collapse. And many people are not ready for what's coming. Because, a lot of them are.
I would agree with you. Thank you for your call. I really do appreciate it. And before I go into the break, I'm going to follow up on what that caller just stated. that people aren't really ready to face what could happen. If we could turn the hands of time back to the Great Depression, folks were better able to cope back then than we are today. And why do I say that? Because there is a lifestyle that most of us are accustomed to living. And if the poop ever splatters in that fan, there's a whole kind of lifestyle. Think about it for a second. You can't use your microwave oven. You won't be able to drive your car. You would have to walk. Back in the 20s, a lot of people walked anyway. There weren't too many cars out on the road. There certainly weren't any microwave ovens. There wasn't, let's go to fast food McDonald's. There was no telephone bill that you could use it. You couldn't use your cell phone. Where are you going to plug it in? Who's going to let you plug it in? Kids would be lost without their phone. Can you imagine if a depression for more than a week or two, a depression of 3 or 4 years, were to hit the United States of America? What do you think would happen? Don't you think that there would be chaos? And I don't mean just chaos on the streets. Chaos just about everywhere. Because people wouldn't be able to cope. Back in the olden days, just about everybody was blue collar. They knew how to work with their hands. They weren't overburdened with school. And I say it like that because, we have so many teachers now and people that work in that type of profession. Well, if everything goes bust, they're not going to get paid. They're not going to work. How are they going to survive? Back in the olden days, there were a lot of kids in a family to help out on the farm. How many farms do you see today? Who has a chicken? Who would know how to lift the chicken up to get the eggs so you can break a couple of eggs to make an omelet? Who knows how to bake bread? These are the staples of society that most people have no clue how to go about making. How many people, male, female, know how to darn socks? Because you're not going to be able to go out and buy socks and your toes are going to bust through socks and all of a sudden you're going to have holy socks. You're not going to have 80 pairs of shoes in the closet or 20 pairs of sneakers. We are spoiled here. I don't know how we would make it. 508-996-0500. Yes, I'm here. A couple of messages. Woman friend says it was rice, not corn, that was being dropped in Gaza. She's absolutely correct. So it was right. But can you imagine that? Rice instead of corn being dropped in sand and then being picked up for little kids and their parents to try to eat. Other thing from our app chat. As of March 2024, the average rent in Providence, Rhode Island is $1,860 per month. This is 24% higher than the national average price of $1,497 a month. And he also goes on to say, making Providence one of the most expensive cities in the U.S. I'm talking about the greater Providence area, and the greater Providence area's price is still a lot less than the greater Boston price, still less than the price along here. And that's what makes it more affordable for folks, even down here, to think about living in Greater Providence. Thank you for your patience. Hello.
Hello, I called in because I heard you say that we're a spoiled country.
Yes, we're spoiled people in the country.
Okay, if that's true that we're spoiled because we spoil the wrong people. How many times do I have to see a fire truck coming out of the station, speeding over to deliver Narcan to a drug addict for the 10th time already? Let him die is what I say. You want to die? Keep doing it. That's wasting money. At the same time, whose bright idea was it to start a needle exchange program where they bring in their dirty needles and we give them a new one? That costs money. And now, I don't know what happened to the idea that I heard a while back where they wanted to actually have a place where they can go in and shoot themselves in so they don't do it on the street. And at the same time that all that's going on, I have to come out of a grocery store and see aging veterans sitting at a folding table with a coffee can looking for donations because the American government does not take care of its own veterans. It's sickening, and it makes me puke.
Well, I would agree with all that you just stated there, but it doesn't mean that the rest of us aren't spoiled by all the different things that are going on.
Illegal aliens too, Mr. Thomas. Illegal aliens coming in and getting everything.
Haven't I admitted to that?
Yes, they are sitting pretty. But you're saying we're spoiled in America.
We are, because we as a people here, we don't know how to handle the rough times like they did back in the Depression.
The people you vote for, that's the problem. We're voting people into high places, and they're doing whatever they want. We have disgusting people right now running the place, and it's a horror story. Look what's going on.
I can't argue what you're saying, but it doesn't mean that if the poop hits the fan, that the rest of us are going to be able to survive like the folks did back in the 1920s and 1930s. That's all.
I want to stop giving Narcan and needles away.
I'll be right there with you trying to get that to stop.
Thank you.
But I appreciate the call.
So much.
Thank you very much. Ken Pittman is up next. He's going to carry you for the next 3 hours. I'm Brian. It's been a pleasure. We will do it again.